Hi there, my name is Mariani, and in today's video, I will show you how I made my quilt label. This label is for my very first quilt, which I made and finished last year. From watching many quilters on YouTube, I've learned the importance of having a quilt label and how it celebrates or marks a special time when the quilt was made. And I wanted to do that as well for my quilt and remember the time when I started this new hobby, which I'm really enjoying. There are many great videos on label making, but I still had a few issues, and I guess that's because it's my first time doing this. So my plan was to trace the label details onto a piece of fabric, then do the embroidery, and then sew that piece of fabric to the back of my quilt. But it didn't quite go to plan. So I'll show you some of my process, the mistakes that I made, and what I did to fix it. What I've done so far is I made a template, I guess, and I wrote up the title I wanted to give for my quilt. I actually thought about it for a long time, thinking of some cool, funky names, and it didn't really stick with me or feel special to me because I was just making the name up on the spot, and it didn't connect with my quilt, if that makes sense. I always called my quilt my first quilt, my first quilt. I always kept referring to it as like my first quilt, and I know it's very plain, but I thought I would just call it what I've always known it to be, which is my first quilt that I'm very proud of. So that's my title, and then I've also got my full name, which is a very long name. And yes, I'm planning to embroider, like hand embroider it on, which is going to be quite the task, but I'm looking forward to the challenge, and I think it will also give me plenty of practice as well. And I've just got the date at the bottom of when I finish the quilt. Now I'm just going to put the fabric in the embroidery hoop. This is the only embroidery hoop I have, and it is large. Well, it's larger than the fabric that I've cut out, so it doesn't completely take up all of this space, but I hope it should fit. Otherwise I might have to get a smaller one, but I hope it won't be too much of an issue. And I hope it can just be fine like this. Wait, let's not put that top thing there. All right, let me get this sorted. Okay, I don't know. Is it going to... I think it should be okay. All right. Well, I've just done my first word, and okay, yes. Here's my stitching. It's not the best, but that's my first done. I decided to go with black thread and do it for all of my letters, and then I think I will use the maroon thread to stitch the label onto the backing, and it can be like a bit of a border. So at the moment my stitches are, not quite straight and a bit lumpy and clunky in areas, but I think the main thing is that you can read my letters and read the words that they say. There is one thing though, that when I tie my stitches on the back or when I start, there's quite a lot of chunky thread, and I really don't want these big leftover pieces to be seen from the front side because this is quite a light fabric. So I don't know how to get rid of it, or maybe try to hide it in line with the letters. But yes, I'm excited for how it will turn out. I'll come back in another day and show you the embroidery on my quilt label. So that was my first attempt at making my label, and it was a fail. As you could see, my fabric wasn't completely in the hoop, and that meant that it wasn't being pulled evenly on all sides. So like as I started to embroider the letters, it was being pulled horizontally this way, and it was quite firm, but vertically it was a bit loose. So these lumps started to appear around the letters. I actually have it here still. So yeah, I hope that shows properly. So yeah, it was being pulled like horizontally this way, but vertically, like going up this way, it was loose. So it started to get a bit bumpy around my letters. I did continue for a bit, but yeah, in the end, the material was just too thin, and I was doing a backstitch as well. So that meant there were these like layers and layers of thread. It just started to become a bit heavy. And the knots that I was tying on the back, you could actually see from the front. Yeah, from the front, you could see like the shadows of the knots. So it didn't look quite nice. And then at one point, I noticed that when I would put the needle in, you could literally like see a visible hole where the needle was going in and where like the thread was sort of tugging, I guess, against the fabric, because yeah, it was just too thin and a bit too fragile, and I needed more stability. So I decided to leave that one and start all over again. Here's my second attempt at my label. It's right here. Oh wait, let's make sure the lighting's okay. There we go. Is that the thumbnail? Yes. So yep, that's my label right here, and I am very, very happy with it. So first thing, here's what I did. The first thing I did was cut a bigger piece of fabric. Oh my goodness, yes, not this tiny little like strip of, you know, that was not going to work for me. So yeah, first thing I did was cut a bigger piece of fabric and made sure that it could fit completely in my hoop. That way I could have a much more even distribution, and everything could be firm and taut within the hoop, so I can have a good foundation to start with. I also decided to buy some light interfacing and try using that, but I did have a little trouble with that. Number one, because I've never used interfacing before, and number two, because Spotlight didn't have a lot of options, so I just picked the lightest one. I thought interfacing was supposed to have one side that you iron and another side that is material, but this one you iron both sides, and so once all my details were traced on, I ironed the other side, and then the paper, I thought, do I start sewing through the paper, like hand sewing through the paper? Yeah, I was a bit confused. I think I'm
only familiar with the interfacing where you just have like the material style interfacing and you can just sew straight through it, I decided to put just plain white cotton on the back. And so, yeah, there's 3 layers: my label, the interfacing, and then the white fabric on the back. And actually, I think it turned out fine. But one thing I've noticed is that it wasn't the same weight. So if I hold it up here, this quilt here is really soft and flexible, and then this one was a bit harder, like it's a bit more how do you say, it's a bit more stiff, I would say, and not as soft and flexible as this. Yeah, I mean, it turned out fine. I do really like how my embroidery turned out. It's actually quite neat, and I think overall it looks really clean. So I'm very happy with the overall finish. I think next time I'll try to find the interfacing where you can just stitch in, or I will I will iron one side, do the embroidery with just the interfacing and the first layer of material, and then stick that directly onto my quilt. I think I will try that next time too, because another thing I found is that because I had 3 layers, it looks like my label is sitting on top of the quilt rather than a part of the quilt. I would rather it sit more closer to the actual quilt and be a bit more seamless and not like this one thing laying on top of it. But I think it looks okay. So I used a back stitch to sew my letters and 3 strands of embroidery thread in the color black. And then I also did 3 strands in a pinky color that kind of matches my backing fabric. And I tried out a blanket stitch for the border to like attach the label onto the backing. And I'm really happy with how that turned too. Like I've been saying, there are like 3 layers: the fabric, the interfacing, and then that back fabric. So trying to push the needle into that and then go into the quilt and then come back and do that blanket stitch. There were layers and layers and layers, so it was a bit fiddly. And then I had to make sure that my needle didn't fully go to the other side. But in the end, I sort of got into a good groove, and I think the blanket stitch looks really nice and I'm very happy. So that was how I made my quilt label. It was a bit of a learning process for me, but I really enjoyed it too. It's something new. I haven't done that much embroidery, and also learning how to use interfacing and then like realizing there's different types of interfacing. Yeah, it was all new things that I learned, and I can't wait to also try the other options of making quilt labels. I've seen a few different ways people attach them to their quilts, and I think I might give those out a go for future quilts that I make. Thank you so much for watching and sticking around until the end. I'll make sure I come back with more quilting videos for you soon, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.